Larry, we're back with another session of the Citizens Grand Jury, and today we're going to be hearing a wrap-up from our expert witness, John Cullen, as well as introducing some new evidence pertaining to Ilhan Omar. But there's some breaking news that's come to our attention just as we were about to go to air. How are you today, Larry?
Very good, Jason. We're going to talk about a number of things, and of course, next week we're going to actually secure the indictment of Ilhan Omar. We're going to have Laura Loomer here on our show. She's committed to testifying with regard to Ilhan Omar, I can't pronounce it anymore, and Rashida Tlaib. Maybe I don't want to pronounce it. Could be the fact. But the reason for these citizens' grand juries is because our justice system no longer exists. And we, the people, as we've said, need to take our own justice system back, just as the founding fathers and colonialists did in the days, months, and years leading up to 1776. And that brings us to our Third Continental Congress. I hope that you will attend. Go to freedomwatchusa.org. We're going to have some very prominent speakers, people like Alan Keyes, Sheriff Joe Arpaio, John is going to be there as well, John Cullen, Jason, others, many more. We're going to get that up on our website in the next day or so. But I hope that you can come, and if you're a veteran or a student, you get in free, but otherwise we require a contribution. You will get a hat, and you'll get a pin, and you'll get my book and a t-shirt. So it's not that you're coming and just giving it away, but we do need you. We need to rally the troops for our peaceful and legal revolution, and that's what this Citizens Grand Jury is all about. So go to freedomwatchusa.org. Jason will be there. He'll be live streaming, and he'll be also speaking because he's had his own personal experiences, particularly with big tech and being censored.
If I may add, Larry, I think it's important that we let everybody know that what we're planning in Philadelphia is an educational event to help everybody understand how the Continental Congress is intended to work. And we have absolutely no plans of inciting anyone to do anything. It's important that people remember that and do not come if you don't agree with that.
No, I agree with that. Nothing violent, but we do have a right under our Constitution where it says, in the course of human events, when the sovereign no longer represents the people, they have a right under nature's God, nature's law, nature's God, to alter or abolish that government and to form a new government by and for the people, with equal rights for everyone. So, we're not sitting there just talking like Sean Hannity on TV. What we're talking about is getting the discussion rolling as to whether we need to create a government by and for the people and to shore up some of the loopholes in our Constitution. And you can go to freedomwatchusa.org and see what we're talking about. Larry Klayman and the people around Larry Klayman do more than just talk. We act. Everything we do is peaceful and legal, but we have a right to discuss whether or not this government represents us and whether we need a new government. And I propose that government be taken back to Independence Hall, by and for the people. So that's what we are trying to do, and we're getting great thinkers there to do it. I just was on a radio show with Alan Nathan, who's a great thinker. He's going to be there as well, and you can go up on our website and see who they are. These are respected people. But let me talk about what's been happening just in the last 2 days. In the last 2 days, we've seen a further breakdown of our justice system, and that's why we need these citizens' grand juries. We've seen that a judge that I used to put my faith in and admired, Judge Royce C. Lambert of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. And I want you to listen to my podcast today. You can go to freedomwatchusa.org and listen to it, because I don't want to take all this time here. We have to proceed with the grand jury. But here's a judge who had a peaceful protester in front of him that had been indicted by the Biden-Harris Justice Department, which has been acting like a Gestapo on behalf of Biden and Harris, rounding people up, getting friends to rat out friends, creating terror, quote unquote, throughout the countryside so that any dissent is quelled against the total leftist takeover of this country. And also, anybody who says anything that tried to justify the 99% of the people who were peaceful on January 6th is now being held to account. Judge Lambert, in sentencing this woman, gave her probation, but he went on a tirade, basically calling the people that were there in favor of Trump on January 6th in the Capitol, even if they were peaceful, basically calling them domestic terrorists. These judges fear for their own safety. And of course, we don't want anything to happen to them either. And we've never advocated that. But they're putting their own interests in front of the interests of the American people. Judge Lambert, like he did with Sheriff Joe Arpaio, when he wouldn't let Sheriff's case continue for defamation, when he was branded a felon, when he was not a felon, okay, he was found liable of a misdemeanor, has sold out to the left. These are establishment people. Even Lambert, who, I was very praiseworthy of and consider a friend. I'm not sure he considers me that way anymore because I've been critical. He's been critical of me in the past as well. But he sold out. But he is an establishment creature. And these are the people we get on the bench. And we need new people on the bench. We need people that are elected and accountable to we, the people, not accountable to the lobbyists who paid large campaign contributions to get them on the bench. So that's point one. Now, the other thing, which tells you why we need to take back our legal system, is that just this morning, Rudy Giuliani, former mayor of New York, the president's lawyer, as much as I've been critical, I thought, that he wasn't always effective as Trump's counsel, but he was in good faith, and he tried to the best of his ability. I give him credit for that. He was suspended by the New York Bar Association without a hearing. Without a hearing. Listen to that. This is outrageous. And this is what I've been going through in the District of Columbia with their disciplinary apparatus, where people who are actually avowed and proud communists, such as persons like Michael Tiger, sit on hearing committees, where every president of the District of Columbia Bar, all four presidents and a senior deputy bar counsel, filed a complaint against Attorney General William Barr because he withdrew the indictment of Michael Flynn and then spoke about it on Fox News. Now, the irony is that Bill Barr really did nothing to hurt the left. I mean, he actually hurt the right because he did nothing. He never enforced the rule of law. Where a complaint was filed against Kellyanne Conway for remarks she made on MSNBC, a complaint against Senator Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley for also coming to the defense of Donald Trump in the last election. This is what we're dealing with. And we're dealing with a legal system which has been totally corrupted, including the New York and District of Columbia bars. Not all bars, but those two, ultra-leftist, super leftist. And in the DC bar, for instance, there's not one official who hasn't given heavily, there may be one, but I don't know of one, to either Obama, Clinton, or other Democratic candidates, nothing in any way given to Republicans, not that they should give to anybody at all and serve in these posts. But this is what we're dealing with. And this is the importance of our citizens' grand juries. Like our founding fathers, we will take back our legal system. And yes, what we're doing is educational, but the education is intended to cause action which is peaceful and legal to save this country. And as I say at the end of all my podcasts and radio shows, is that the father and son will only help those that help themselves. If you think you can sit on the couch and smoke your cigar and drink your scotch or eat your popcorn and sip your wine and watch Sean Hannity and think that's enough, then you can forget about a country for your children and grandchildren. So yes, Freedom Watch is an action group. That's what we are. We don't just talk, we act, but we act peacefully and legally. So that being said, let's turn it over to John and let's finish up his fine presentation that he gave with regard to this undisclosed, subliminal, latent pandemic with the Spanish flu that the government has not disclosed to us and which is going to rear its ugly head in the months and years ahead, and which Dr. Fauci has covered up. So this is with regard to the indictment of Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Thank you, Larry. So I thought I would wrap up the testimony with a summary, a recap, based on the last three testimonies that I gave to the grand jury. The data that you'll see today has been updated, so it represents the most recent updates from the CDC. So in summary, the reason I was engaged in this in the first place is because of the map from Johns Hopkins. I didn't put any maps in this presentation. I think we showed you guys the maps before. But the notion that today there still aren't 10 people dead in Beijing, there still aren't 10 people dead in Shanghai, there's not 250 dead in Hong Kong, but it continues through Asia. It's not just China. It's Vietnam, it's Thailand, it's Laos, Cambodia, Mongolia, and Australia. We talked about how more people have fallen down in Australia and died than have died from coronavirus. So using statistics like that were map-based, I started to dig in. And what we found, you can go to the next slide, Jason. So what we found, first of all, was something that was rather remarkably strange, which was that Dr. Fauci, at a Georgetown presentation for the Center for Global Health Science and Security, Dr. Fauci predicts that the incoming Trump administration is going to experience a surprise outbreak. Now, this prediction was made in January of 2017, before President Trump was sworn in. And Dr. Fauci says this incoming administration will most certainly experience a surprise outbreak. And that's on the next slide. So, Jason, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that there's a clip of Dr. Fauci saying this. And so that seemed rather strange that he was able to predict a surprise outbreak in 2017. This is January of 2017. So if we go to the next slide, what I spent the last three testimonies sharing with the grand jury is that the data that I'm using for all these charts I'm showing you is coming directly from the CDC. So I go to the CDC's website and I download their data on a regular basis. And so the charts you're going to see now were updated June 24th, 2021. And this is the most recent official data from the National Center for Health Statistics at CDC. So the statistics that we pull away from their data, that Dr. Fauci, Dr. Walensky, Dr. Redfield, Francis Collins, that whole team have not disclosed to the public, that seems to be relevant to the conversation. Number one, 80% of the people that died with SARS-CoV-2 were 65 and older. 80%. Now let's go to the next slide and I'll show you what that looks like. So on the left, you see a pie chart with the actual numbers. And then on the right, I asked it to show it as percentages. And what we're looking at is in the United States, people who died with SARS-CoV-2, this is all deaths with SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. The actual numbers are on the left, the percentages are on the right. 80% of the people who died were 65 and older. Okay, let's go to the next slide. As of today, a year and a half into this pandemic, SARS-CoV-2 has killed less than 300 school-aged children in the entire United States. Now, we're talking about kids that are 5 to 18 years old here. Okay, more kids drown than have died from coronavirus. All right, 262, I think this might be last week's number. Yeah, this week, I think it's up 1 or 2. But the notion that less than 300 children have died, and yesterday and today, the CDC is having an emergency meeting to discuss issues with the heart. Jason, what's the name of that affliction?
Myocarditis and pericarditis, which, as I understand it, is an inflammation of the sac around the heart and it can be extremely dangerous, very rare in young, healthy people.
So there was an emergency meeting yesterday at the CDC about myocarditis. The pericarditis came up in the meeting as well. But one of the things that did not come up in the meeting, let's go back up to the number of kids less than 300. The thing that didn't come up in the meeting is that less than 300 children have died from the disease. So if less than 300 children have died from coronavirus, and I think now it's 263 or 265 or something, but it's less than 300. If less than 300 kids have died, why are we vaccinating all of the children? Because more kids drown than died from coronavirus. So does this constitute a medical emergency? Now, last year, 199 kids died from pediatric influenza. So how far away is that number? All right. The next issue that I didn't really talk about in the last three testimonies, but this came up because of yesterday's meeting at the CDC, this emergency meeting that was talking about these issues in the VAERS system. One of the issues that I'm not hearing brought up that needs to be discussed is that there are only 119 children in the United States that have died with SARS-CoV-2. This is all deaths with COVID. More than half of these kids also had influenza. We know that. But for newborns to 4 years old, there's 119 deaths. But the VAERS system is showing us that for women who were pregnant who took the vaccine, we've had 692 miscarriages. So to me, when I look at the data this way, using actual facts, actual numbers, not superlatives, what I'm seeing is that the apparent remedy seems to be killing more newborns than the disease it's designed to prevent. That's what I take away from that. The VAERS system on the left is showing us how many people have miscarried. And I don't think I'm allowed to say women anymore, Larry. I think I have to say birthing persons, or I'm going to get sued. I'm going to get sued by CNBC if I say women. So birthing persons that have miscarried. Yeah. So Larry, get me out of this mess, please.
Well, and so, don't say we're going to have fried chicken and watermelon for lunch either.
At IKEA. No, we're definitely not shopping at IKEA. I've had it with them. Yeah, they're definitely causing trouble. All right, so we've had
fried chicken and watermelon. It's great. It's a great summer treat. You know?
So for those of you who don't know, that was the Juneteenth celebration at IKEA that Larry is referencing.
Well, let me just finish back here. This is more than cancel culture, and that's what I was talking about with the District of Columbia Bar and the New York Bar. I said it's to remove anyone who will stand up to the tyranny of the left, which has taken total control of our country. That's what it's all about. Go ahead, John.
Well, when we look at these numbers side by side and we look at 692 miscarriages compared to the pie chart on the right, the pie chart on the right is how many little kids have died from the disease in the first place. Excuse me. So if there's 119 kids that have died from coronavirus and close to 700 miscarriages, nobody thinks this is worth spending any time discussing, Dr. Fauci? Dr. Walensky, Yes.
I have a question. Because it's my understanding that the VAERS system is a voluntary reporting system. So if we have 692 cases, it's possible there are additional miscarriages that never reported to this system because they did not make the connection.
Yeah, that was acknowledged in the CDC meeting yesterday. So I watched, they broadcast it live, and I watched the CDC emergency meeting yesterday and recorded it. And one of the things that came up is exactly what you just said, is that the system tends to be under-reporting because it's voluntary. And most people don't sit down and start creating a VAERS account. So yes, it's probably undercounted. And that was confirmed in the meeting at the CDC yesterday. The next element of what, again, appears to be this criminal negligence, SARS-CoV-2 has killed twice as many men as women in almost every single age group. And again, this came up in the emergency CDC meeting yesterday, but only when the evidence was presented that 75% of the, what's the name of the condition again? I keep drawing a blank on it.
Myocarditis and pericarditis.
Myocarditis. So 75% of the myocarditis cases are male. Well, that sounds like a big deal until you go to the next slide and you realize, well, SARS-CoV-2 kills mostly men in the first place. So if it's killing mostly men in the first place, the fact that 75% of the myocarditis cases are also men, I don't find that so outlandish, because I know this, but most people don't, because Dr. Fauci kept this a secret. Now, why does Dr. Fauci not think this is important? This is a 2-to-1 ratio. Twice as many men in these age categories are dying as women. And I'm basing this on chromosomes, not sexual identification. So the chromosomes you were born with is what we're talking about here. And it's a 2-to-1 ratio. And Dr. Fauci didn't think this was relevant to the conversation. I find this very hard to comprehend why this would not be relevant. Let's go to the next slide, please. To the extent that the economy was shut down, that restaurants were shut down, that businesses were shut down, that gymnasiums and salons and all this was shut down, there aren't 17,500 people dead in the United States that are 45, that are younger than 45. 17,500, but there's not 17,500 people younger than 45 that have died with coronavirus in the United States. So yet we shut down the NCA, the colleges, and all this other stuff. Now, back in 2017, 2018, 10,000 people died of influenza just in Texas. Just in Texas, 10,000 people died of influenza in 2017, 2018, and the Dallas Cowboys kept playing football. All right. What you see here, younger than 45 is in blue and older than 45 is in green. Does it appear kind of clear where the problem lies? And why did we shut down the NCAA? Why did we torture high school kids?
Well, are
45. Go ahead, Larry.
Are you suggesting that Dr. Fauci, by withholding information, is intentionally trying to harm the people of the United States?
The evidence is so overwhelming. There's so much evidence, Larry, of lies of omission. Again, it's not like it's one development here. If it was one single development, maybe there'd be some plausible deniability.
You know,
but we had four.
Let me interject this too, and not to interrupt, but so the thought gets out there, is that a violation under man-made law, 18 USC 1001, is for making a false statement to the government. It's not just making a false statement, but omitting material facts. For that, you can get 10 years in prison if you make a statement which is false or omits material facts in a government filing for that act. Under the laws of nature and nature's God, see, this is where we differ, okay? We're not necessarily bound by that which our corrupt Congress has enacted. But if the government does the same thing to the people, if they either give them false facts or withhold material information, that bears on their health, safety, and welfare, then they should be held criminally liable as well. So this will be included in the indictment against Fauci, because what's good for the goose is good for the gander. It's time the American people held government officials to the same standard that the American people are held to. Go ahead.
So, Larry, I think, at minimum, we would be looking at criminal negligence. And you would know the formal definition, but at minimum, the amount of evidence I'm seeing here that's been just completely not shared with the public. If it's not criminal negligence, then my understanding of criminal negligence is all wrong. But my understanding of criminal negligence is that I think this adds up to it.
And negligent homicide. Like I said in an earlier session,
Exactly.
This is our 14th session. This is
And
Derek
the
Chauvin is going to get life for what happened with George Floyd, and that was negligent homicide. That's exactly what Fauci has done with the American people.
The reason it's so important for the grand jury to understand the role that the influenza played in the pandemic is that the influenza has FDA-approved therapeutics, whereas coronavirus, the only FDA-approved therapeutic is remdesivir, and the WHO does not recommend it. So there's no oral therapeutics for coronavirus, but there are for influenza. And so if we had 600,000 people or so die, and it turned out that more than half of them had the influenza, and they weren't given the therapeutics, I think exactly, Larry, that has to be negligent homicide. How is it not? If you've got a patient in a bed with influenza that you don't diagnose and they die, and you had a therapeutic like a Xofluza or Romantadine, there's a whole number of them, that potentially could have treated it, how is that not negligent homicide? So again, I'm not the law guy, I'm the numbers guy, but what I can tell you as a matter of fact, in the United States for the past 3 months, according to the CDC's mortality data, more people have died from PNI, which is pneumonia and influenza, which is what Dr. Fauci talks about when he says 2017, 80,000 people died. More people have died from PNI in the last 3 months than COVID every single week for the last 3 months. Not just total. Every single week, more people died from influenza PNI than from COVID. And the data is coming right from their system at the NIH. Next slide, Jason, you'll see the data. So this is 13 weeks of data. Since week 10 in the United States, 57,900, I can't read it, Jason, maybe you can read it, 57,998 have died from PNI. So 57,998 have died from influenza, while 49,618 have died from COVID since week 10. Now, if you zoom out and you look at it, what you'll see is the influenza is blue, the COVID is green. And every single week for the last 3 months in the United States, more people have died from PNI than have died with COVID. But Dr. Fauci hasn't said anything, and there are therapeutics for influenza besides Tamiflu. Tamiflu's old. We have Xofluza, we have Romantadine. There's a number of therapeutics that are approved.
John, I don't know if you've heard this. I don't know if you've heard this latest news. You and I have spoken quite a bit about YouTube's rules against their allegations of vaccine misinformation. They've changed that rule now to treatment misinformation.
Well, I think they just part and parcel to what we're talking about, which is a total leftist takeover, every aspect of government, the federal courts in particular, the social media.
Well, that takes us.
Corporations, labor unions, intelligentsia, universities. We now live in the equivalent of the Fourth Reich. And this is what we're dealing with. So, yeah, of course, they've lowered the threshold here because they've got to squash it out. And when you see a judge like Royce Lamberth, cave in to the left, it tells you where we are today is that they've got control of everybody. They have total domination. And people are scared and they don't want to speak out and they don't want to act. And that's what we're trying to do peacefully and legally with our citizens' grand juries and also with our Third Continental Congress and everything else that we're doing at Freedom Watch and other endeavors. So that's what it's about. And then you've got the New York Bar and the District of Columbia Bar disciplinary apparatus trying to eliminate conservative lawyers who will stand up to them. And you have a total takeover of the country. And you don't have to do it with red coats and muskets. You can do it, by just intimidating people to follow like sheep the leftist total takeover of this country.
Well, the good news is there is a law when it comes to emergency use authorization. And that law is U.S. Code Title 21. And it appears that the FDA may have broken the law when they issued the emergency use authorization because we already had an approved therapeutic in remdesivir. And according to the law, you're not supposed to issue an emergency use authorization if there's already an alternative treatment. Now, it's different when we're talking about diagnostics. The diagnosing and the diagnostic equipment is different than the treating and the prevention. So when you see the law, you start to understand, so the emergency use authorization for the vaccines to Pfizer, Moderna, J&J would never have been granted if, in fact, a therapeutic had been found to be effective. But one was, which is remdesivir, and it was approved. So once remdesivir was approved, you're not supposed to grant an EUA on something.
And you raised the point, John. There is no law. Okay, we live in a lawless society. It doesn't matter what the law is, and that's why we're citizens' grand juries. We have to enforce the laws of nature, and nature is God, and that's what we're doing. So thank you for that. Let's move on. If you want to sum it up real quickly, because we want to spend the next 25 minutes on Ilhan Omar, and we have more information.
All right, so let me wrap it up. Yep, let me wrap it up. So the net of the testimony, let's go back up one or two slides, Jason. The net of the testimony that I showed you, you can stop there. That's a good one. Is that we were experiencing an outbreak in the United States of influenza in January, February, March of 2020 that was unprecedented. 4,000 people a week were dying. And what we looked at in previous testimony was, well, did that just disappear? Or what happened for real? What actually happened? The data that I've shown the grand jury over the course of the last 3.5 testimonies would indicate that the United States and maybe the rest of the world has just experienced the worst influenza outbreak since 1918. Now, was this a gain-of-function virus that would point back to Dr. Fauci, to Dr. Kawaoka, to Dr. Taubenberger? I can't be certain, but the behavior of Dr. Fauci not wanting to address the fact that there's why would that be such a secret that there's 2 outbreaks? We've talked about this in previous testimony. So if in fact it had been this strain from Taubenberger or from Kawaoka that was easily identifiable, that Dr. Judy Mikovits testified, she said, it's like a non-issue, right? So if it's easily identifiable and traces back to Walter Reed or Fort Detrick, well, then the whole world would want to come and visit the United States labs instead of Wuhan.
Well, in addition to Wuhan.
Well, Wuhan is all about coronavirus, and coronavirus hasn't killed 10 people in Beijing or Shanghai. So that's why.
For one, it's too many. So.
Well, of course, but 10 people in Beijing, 10 people in Shanghai aren't dead yet.
I
and we
understand.
don't have and we don't have 100 dead in Vietnam. So what that simply introduces is, well, wait a second, how deadly is it compared to the influenza pandemic we just experienced? And if it turns out that, well, the SARS thing is not a good thing, nobody wants to get SARS-CoV-2, but forget it. This influenza is incredibly dangerous. And that appears to be what happened based on the data.
Well, and that's enough to seek an indictment. As I said at the outset, when we gave the instructions, you can indict much less than probable cause on mere suspicion. So that will come out in a subsequent trial, Dr. Fauci. You've done excellent work, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. I appreciate the opportunity to testify. Thank you,
Won't
Grant.
be the last time, because you're a great resource and a great investigator and statistician. I appreciate that, and American people appreciate that. And Jason, why don't we lay some stuff out in addition to what was already presented with regard to Ilhan Omar, some articles showing her involvement with allegations of tax fraud, of funneling campaign monies to her boyfriend and now husband, on top of the immigration fraud that we've talked about. And we'll follow that up next week also with Laura Loomer, who has information that was way ahead of the curve here, who uncovered the corruption of Ilhan Omar before anyone else did. She's my client, my friend. She's Jason's friend as well. And also we'll get into Rashida Tlaib, who actually criminally assaulted Laura Loomer at a campaign event in Minnesota a few years ago. But go ahead,
Yeah.
Jason. What do you have?
Well, I think it's worth mentioning, and Laura will go into great detail in this regard when we have her next week. But Laura went to Minnesota. She confronted Keith Ellison, who is now the state attorney general. And he, of course, would play a major role in deciding if Laura's cases would go forward or not, which they haven't. Laura pointed out a number of questions related to Ilhan Omar, including a vacant home that was used to establish the district that she was running in. And Larry, we've assembled today a number of articles, some of which are quite difficult to find on the internet, but they raise a litany of questions with regard to Ms. Omar's run for Congress, the viability of various visas that she's had. It's interesting that when she ran for office, she was only 33 years old. Many rules in Congress were changed to accommodate her, but the real question is how the money was handled. And as you pointed out, Larry, Ilhan Omar was able to direct campaign funds to a contractor who she was romantically involved in while she was allegedly married to her own brother. And it does seem that the marriage to the brother was not a legitimate marriage, but intended to help him achieve the necessary immigration status to come to the United States. And there are some questions that have been raised about Ilhan Omar's family's history within Somalia. Many people will recall, Larry, that the film Black Hawk Down was a sort of fictional recreation of the real-world events that happened in Mogadishu when a U.S. Black Hawk helicopter was shot down while conducting military operations in the war-torn region. A civil war had ousted the ruler, and warlords were controlling the area, hoarding UN-supplied food rations and basically creating chaos. And it's funny to me, Larry, because you've represented Gold Star families in the case of Extortion 17, where allegations have been raised that there was foreknowledge of the destruction of the helicopter and the murder of several U.S. servicemen and women who were on board. I find it remarkably similar to this Black Hawk Down situation. It's difficult to imagine that the extremely powerful military of the United States could be so easily shot down. Mogadishu is not a sophisticated area with a organized military or substantial technology, and this was a major blow to the morale of the U.S. military at the time. There was a helicopter pilot who was dragged through the streets. His dead body was desecrated in an extremely disturbing manner. And this really, if people remember, had a lot of significance, this event. It can be looked at by some as the downing of only one helicopter, but it was far more important than that, the lives that were lost and the morale that was broken by this. Larry, what do you think about this comparison to Extortion 17?
Well, there's a lot of similarities, and you'll see it throughout recent American modern history. I write about it in my book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. And if you can come to the Third Continental Congress, and if you can't, watch it live stream, thanks to you, Jason. It's going to be telecast by 2 networks as well, portions of it. You'll see I'm bringing in people from all walks of life who have been victimized by the government with no explanation as to what occurred, a lack of respect and concern for we the people, and those who have been terrorized. I mean, I was just talking to one who I used to represent a number of years ago, Donato Dalrymple, who saved Ilium. He's going to be there as well. You remember the machine gun that was shoved in his face by the Justice Department on the orders of Janet Reno, Justice Department, and the Immigration and Naturalization Service at the time. And this is the way the American people have been treated. And this is why we need a Third Continental Congress. So go to freedomwatchusa.org. That's why we need to enforce our own legal system, because we don't have one. And what happened with Lambert today, and what happened with Rudy Giuliani being suspended without even a hearing, this is unbelievable. This is the world we live in today. It's like Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union. And you better wake up, people that are out there, because maybe you make it across the finish line if you're my age, but your kids and grandkids are going to be living in hell. It's going to be much worse even than it is today.
Now, Larry, there's another disturbing aspect to the Ilhan Omar story. Her father was very politically connected in Somalia. He held a role in the Barre regime, which was deposed during the Somalian Civil War, the same incident where Black Hawk Down, the helicopter was shot down. And I think we need to look into this a bit more. There's been very little coverage in the mainstream media here in the United States about this background that Ilhan Omar's father is alleged to have had. Nur Saeed Elmi Mohammed was her father's name, and that was his name before applying for asylum. The issue at hand is that Ilhan Omar's family had fled Somalia, not fleeing persecution, but rather after the allegedly genocidal Barre regime was deposed. Having been a member of the regime, Ilhan Omar's family was basically subject of ire by those rebelling. And it's interesting to note that on June 20th, 2020, this Sahan Journal reported that Ilhan Omar's father died of COVID-19, and according to this, he was loved by everyone. That's perhaps a hyperbolic description of the man. There had to be somebody who didn't like him, and probably it was the rebels who were involved in the Civil War. I think we need to learn more about what Ilhan Omar's family's role was in this violent regime. I think viewers of Crowdsource the Truth and supporters of freedomwatchusa.org will form their own opinions about articles on Snopes, one of these officially sanctioned fact-checking websites, which is asking the question, is Representative Omar's father a Somalian war criminal living illegally in the United States? And I would like to point out to viewers, whether they agree or disagree with this point of view, a lawyer would consider this a compound question, and therefore not a good question, because it presents many ways that it can be answered that are perhaps evasive. It's two questions in one. Is he a war criminal, and is he living illegally in the United States? It's interesting to note that Snopes finds this mostly false, which is a polite way of saying partially true. So the question is he a war criminal, or is he living illegally in the United States? Again, these are questions that we need to do further research into to determine the final answer. But I'm curious, Larry, as the prosecutor, how do you feel about this material?
Well, it's relevant and we need to develop it further. But number one, Ilhan Omar was given status here in this country, was able to emigrate to the United States from Kenya. And Kenya is not a country that you need to leave for political asylum. So somebody inside our own government, because probably she is a Muslim, and because Muslims, unfortunately, these days have more rights than everybody else, they should have equal rights, as other minorities seem to have as well, somehow got herself into this country. Undoubtedly, we'll need to investigate the circumstances of that, which, may give rise to other frauds. We've had a complaint pending with the Department of Homeland Security now for 4 years. And even under the Trump administration, they never acted on it. We even brought a case in federal court to force some action. Of course, the judge wouldn't force it. So this is an important question, and we'll look into it. The testimony of Laura Loomer next week will also reveal, because she studied Ilhan Omar, she was out there, the first one who pointed out who she was and how she had committed immigration fraud, as well as other illegal acts. Laura will be able to testify as to Ilhan Omar's links to terrorist organizations and terrorist groups. She will be able to do that. She's not saying she is a terrorist, but she has questions about her association with terrorists and terrorist groups. And the same is true for Rashida Tlaib. Okay, so this also is important because it bears on, her standing, not just under the law, but also whether she has standing to be a U.S. congressman because of national security interests. But of course, Congress won't act. They're frightened to death of anyone who is African American or Muslim or any minority for being branded a racist. They just play games. They just go on Sean Hannity or wherever, pontificate, raise more money. How many emails do you get every day from the Republican Party? They're absolutely worthless. They've done nothing. And this is why the American people need to rise up. This is why we do what we do. We have no opposition party, and we have a Democrat Party, which is pure evil. And that's what we're dealing with right now.
Absolutely. And that's why, Larry, it's important that our viewers visit freedomwatchusa.org and donate. I hope that people will join us in Philadelphia on July 5th and 6th at the Third Continental Congress. I also want to point out, Larry, that I've got an image here from a video that Laura Loomer shot when she went to a campaign event. And this image quite clearly depicts Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, rather than answering Laura's questions, attempting to steal or break her property. We can see in this image Ilhan Omar grabbing Laura Loomer's mobile phone. This is illegal. You're not allowed to steal people's property or pull things out of people's hands. And certainly in most states, contrary to sometimes popular opinion, assault does not require you to injure a person. Any use of force that makes someone fearful for their personal safety is considered assault in many jurisdictions, including Minnesota, although the Justice Department failed to allow Laura's case to go forward. Give us some more details, if you could, Larry, about what happened there.
Well, first of all, take a look at the picture. There's a video. You can see it up on the internet. You can see it at freedomwatchusa.org. But Ilhan Omar is smiling. She's happy that Laura Loomer is being assaulted by Rashida Tlaib, and Rashida Tlaib is laughing.
Exactly.
Yeah, so this put Laura, because everybody in that room was Muslim, okay, and a radical Muslim in all likelihood, it put her in fear of immediate bodily injury or death at the time. And that is an assault. So I filed a case in federal court, and the federal judge didn't let it go forward. Okay, so that's typical. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I write about in my book. And he said, well, I don't have any jurisdiction. He had jurisdiction. Citizens of different states. He had jurisdiction. It's called diversity jurisdiction. But this is what you're dealing with, and it's why we have to now take back our legal system. It's why at the Third Continental Congress, we're going to be proposing ways to select judges, elect them, not appoint them on the basis of political campaign contributions, otherwise known as bribes, so that we don't have yes men on the bench of the establishment. And now it appears Judge Royce Lamberth is part of that same yes man establishment. He's finally gone native in that regard. And when he has gone native, as I wrote in my book, the best of the worst, then we're really in trouble. And there is nobody on the federal bench that will protect us these days. We must protect ourselves. Third Continental Congress, citizen grand juries, other things that we can be doing. Go to freedomwatchusa.org and join our Justice League. Just like the superheroes in Justice League, you can be Batman, you can be Wonder Woman, you can be whoever you want to be. We have to rise up and remember that these people, Batman, for instance, in order to enforce the law, he had to break man's law. He was a vigilante in New York City. And we're not advocating breaking any laws, but superheroes had to take matters into their own hands, and we're going to do it peacefully and legally.
Right. The matter that we're taking into our hands will be the review of our rights as expressed in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, and all of those things. We absolutely have a right, Larry, to get together and discuss these ideas and educate people about them. In no way are we advocating that anyone takes these things into their own hands in a violent way. The last thing I want to say...
No violence. What I was saying, Jason, just to clarify, is that the superheroes that you revere in the movies did take these things into their hands in a violent way. We're not advocating that. But what I'm saying is that man's laws are not being respected, and that it's the law of nature and nature's God that must be enforced at this point. And that's what our founding fathers wrote in the Declaration of Independence. King George III, much like Biden and Harris, issued one edict after another, illegal edicts that subjugated the American people to virtual slavery. And that's what we're now living in, ironically, as they are stoking a greater and greater race war. It is now the majority which is living under slavery. That's where we are today. When IKEA cannot even give their employees fried chicken and watermelon without being called racist. And of course, they ran for the exits. And when white people and other majorities will not stand up to the radicals of these different groups, most of the people in these groups are decent people. But the radicals have taken control of this country. They've taken now control of the judges as well. And that's where we are.
It's strange, Larry. Most people I know, whatever race they might be, enjoy fried chicken and watermelon. So I don't know how that became such a polarized thing. But the last comment I want to make before we wrap up today's session with regard to Laura Loomer has to do not just with the justice system, although this is a synergistic relationship between the press and the law. Almost any mainstream outlet, when they speak about Laura Loomer, they do it in falsehoods. So here we see BuzzFeed News bashing Laura, saying that she spread anti-Muslim falsehoods about Ilhan Omar, yet they haven't proven anything that she said to be false. I know Laura quite well. Her research and her investigative journalism is all evidence-based. She presents documents that are public and financial records and a variety of different things. So It's unclear how BuzzFeed determined that they were false. In fact, many of the things that Laura was out in front saying back in 2018 have now actually been proven to be true. Laura was speaking about Ilhan Omar dating one of her political consultants who she's now married to. And there is additional evidence that's come forward that she was also married to her own brother. So again, these
that's not even in dispute anymore, Jason. That's not even in dispute. But let's talk about Judy Mikovits too. Same thing, because this is part of the same grand jury session. Is that I put her on Sinclair Broadcasting Network. They have 300 stations throughout the country. A very fine group of people run Sinclair. They put her on, and she said exactly what is now accepted fact with what happened with Fauci and the Wuhan lab and the gain-of-function research and the likelihood that there's a bioweapon. And she was vilified. And Media Matters, funded by George Soros, that self-hating Jew, you know, I'm Jewish myself, so are you, who basically confiscated the property of fellow Jews going to gas chambers and ovens in World War II. This is the guy who's in control of the left in large part, finances it. They went after her, and CNN went after Judy. And it caused Sinclair to pull that thing down, that interview that we did. And CNN, who wrote an article, said, oh, Larry Klayman's the lawyer, and Larry Klayman makes things up. He's a conspiracy theorist. blah, blah, blah. I asked them for proof that I made anything up. They couldn't provide any. So I sued their derriere. I'm in court right now. And don't hold your breath on whether any judge will let it go forward. But you have to hold these people accountable. And that's what we're doing here in these citizens' grand juries.
Indeed, Larry. And we're going to ask the jury to consider the information that we've presented today, both the new information from John Cullen, the wrap-up of his really just outstanding expert testimony that we've been hearing for the past 3 weeks. John has uncovered facts and details, frankly, that were hidden in plain sight, but he's helped America understand in greater detail how this deception was perpetrated, lies of omission, as he's presented today to the grand jury. Additionally, we've only just begun to reveal the information and evidence pertaining to Ilhan Omar. Laura Loomer will join us with even more evidence. Larry, do you want to take us out perhaps with a closing statement before we wrap it up today?
The closing statement is this. It's what I've been saying throughout. I can't say it enough, is that the American people have their own fate in their own hands. The American people do not have a government that represents their interests. The government has broken away from the people. It's exactly what Jefferson wrote and the other founding fathers wrote in our Declaration of Independence. Go back and read it. And consequently, we need to reestablish our own legal system. We need to establish our own government. We should take it out of Washington. We should put it in Philadelphia. I say in Independence Hall. I believe that we would be supported by the American people in doing it. We will always do it peacefully and legally. But we're also, as you said at the outset, educating the American people. These are your rights. And I'm trying to wake people up. Many people who I know, just talk and say, isn't this terrible? Look at what's going on. But then when you ask them if they want to help, they're nowhere to be found. They just want to retire, or they want to go live a good life. And a lot of them are, getting up there in years, as yours truly is as well. But how can you sit there and do nothing? And our founding fathers could not sit there and do nothing. They were up there too, okay? They were in their 50s at the time. And Jefferson and Washington, as I've said many times, could be millionaires in today's world, even with inflation. That's how rich they were. Our colonies were rich. They did not have to risk everything to form a new nation. King George III taxed them to pay for the rest of the empire. And when we balked at that, with the Boston Tea Party and other things, then he tried to take away our guns. And then he took away our legal system. And when hostilities broke out at Lexington and Concord and later in New York, the revolution had begun even before July 4th, 1776. But as I've also said many times, think about it. Who is worse? Biden and Harris and the radical leftists that have put them in power, I believe, with campaign irregularities at a minimum, I would say fraud at a maximum. And people are being persecuted for this right now, for even propagating or even raising the issue of fraud. And that's why Rudy Giuliani was temporarily suspended without a hearing, with no evidence being presented, because he simply defended Trump and said that Biden and Harris had been elected through fraud. So they take away his legal license for that. Every aspect of the American society, large portions of it, whether it's labor unions, whether it's universities, whether it's corporations like Coca-Cola and Delta, whether it's Hollywood, who is now propagating, socially damaging theories on critical race theory and the fact that they don't even call actors and actresses what they are anymore. You have to be called performers. There's no such thing as a sex. Our whole culture is being destroyed, and our legal system is allowing it to happen. And the people who want to fight against the legal system, the powers to be, like the New York Bar Disciplinary Apparatus and DC Bar, trying to take the license away from lawyers who will stand up to them, like Rudy Giuliani, like me. They're not going to succeed with me, but they're going to try. And they even have communists sitting on these hearing committees, like Michael Tiger, who was removed by John Brennan for his communist ties to Fidel Castro, who even Bob Woodward wrote about in his book, The Brethren. The Supreme Court was fired by Justice Brennan for those subversive ties at the request of J. Edgar Hoover. These are the people now in control of our country, the radical left. In fact, just simply the left. And make no mistake about it, they want us removed. If they don't want us removed physically, they want us removed in terms of our ability to fight them. And that's why we now must rise up. That's my closing statement. And this citizens grand jury is one way to do it, and there are other ways to do it. So come to our Third Continental Congress. You can put the banner up, Jason. It's a nice banner. And let's discuss how we resurrect the country from the dead. My Hebrew name is Lazarus. Okay, so maybe there is some reason why I do what I do, because I'm trying, along with you, to raise the country from what now is dead, under total control of the left, under a socialist, increasingly communist, increasingly atheist dictatorship.
Thank you, Larry. And people are going to join us in Philadelphia on July 5th and 6th for the Third Continental Congress. I encourage people to visit freedomwatchusa.org to purchase tickets and also to become a contributor to Freedom Watch. It's extremely important that people support Larry and his team at Freedom Watch. They're doing all kinds of things to protect our rights that the U.S. government won't do. And in addition to learning a lot about how this country was founded and what our rights actually are, people who sign up to join us for the Third Continental Congress are going to receive a copy of Larry's book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry, and you can certainly have it signed by Larry there at the meeting. I also want to remind people they can learn more about John Cullen by visiting his YouTube channel. The John E. Hoover YouTube channel features many videos and lots of details about the fantastic research that John has been doing. You can see John every Friday here on Crowdsource the Truth and also on patreon.com/IamJohnCullen or subscribestar.com/IamJohnCullen. I want to support all the viewers who are watching Crowdsource the Truth on alternate platforms like rumble.com. Please visit rumble.com/user/crowdsource the truth, and we can build up our audience on platforms that are not controlled by Google. This is another thing, Larry, that we really need to band together to do to try to come out from under the grip of this technocratic control grid that we're all part of. I also want to remind people that you can sponsor Crowdsource the Truth by going to subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth or patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. Thanks to all of our citizen grand jurors for participating today. Thank you to John Cullen for his excellent testimony. And Larry, thanks to you.
We'll be back next week, same time, same place. I hope that you share this with your friends, get the word out. We, the American people, must rise up, or we'll have nothing left. God bless you all.